I just had a thought. Sorry. I have to go grab my external microphone because the mic on my computer doesn't work. I don't know why those things are so expensive, but they are. Okay. All right. So like I said, some of this will be review for everybody, some of it will be new. Bear with me, I'm gonna try to make this pretty interactive, so there are some slides that we're gonna fill in together. There are some papers that I'm gonna pull up and we'll look at together that are example papers. I have some demonstration items we're gonna pass around, so I'm hoping this is pretty active. That said, I do want to review that a lot of people will start doing their very first literature review through Google and Google Scholar. And that's all fine and dandy, but what happens 99% of the time is you're gonna run into a paywall when you find a title that you really, really wanna read. You see that title and you try to go access it and you can't access the PDF because it wants you to pay $40, $50 to read that publication. So this is a common issue. And the good news is that if you are a student at a university, it is extremely likely that your university pays for these journal subscriptions on your behalf. So if you have a university login, I'm going to show, this is specific to Florida State University, but it's been like the exact same process for every university I have ever been a part of. So Clemson, Notre Dame, UT Austin, it's all very similar. You Google for the library website. So for us, I always Google FSU library, and the very first link that comes up is this one here. This is our library's homepage. There will be some way for you to log into your library system. And for us, that means that you need to click on this little person icon. It says my account. That takes you to the FSU login portal, log in with your FSU ID, and then it will look. It looks similar to this page, but with a couple of extra things. And all you need to do is hit new search. Then you'll have a one search bar that you can type in keywords, phrases, titles, just like you would with Google Scholar, whatever it is you're wanting to search. Type it in, hit enter, and it will show you all the results. But the magical thing is that when you hit the button to say, like go see online version, it will get you past that paywall. When you follow that link, it tells the web page that you have access because you're an FSU student, and you will not see the paywall. It'll take you right to somewhere where you can download a PDF. And I can't show you exactly what that looks like because it's different for every single journal that you will log into. But suffice it to say, somewhere on that page, you should see some way to access the PDF of the paper you're trying to look at. Okay? So this is the magical thing that a lot of people don't realize when they first start doing a literature review for the first time. Right? We've been through that before, so I'm gonna move on. My next question for you, and we're gonna fill in this slide together, are, I guess I'm not gonna ask you what are the different reasons you might be doing a literature review because I put that in there. But I want you to think about some of the implications about how you would go about this literature review or how you would go about reading a particular paper if your reason for doing so was one of these items on the list. Okay, so one of the first times that you're probably going to come into contact with scientific literature is you just joined Rhythm Lab and Dr. Higgins is like, here's the paper that is moving us forward on this project that I am very interested in. I want you to read this paper, okay? And I hand you a paper. What do you think the implications are for how you might read that paper if I'm the one handing it to you and saying reading it? Alex?
You would understand keywords and information.
Okay, you probably want to aim to understand most of it. especially key vocab and concepts. Is that roughly right? Haley, right, Haley? Yes,
Yeah.
Haley. God, sorry, my brain is off today.
No, you're okay.
Go ahead.
Like making connections to what we're doing now to what.
Yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah, you'll want to relate this new info to the project that you are working on. Very good. So you want to make connections in your brain, Gary?
The overall conclusion they arrived at.
Yeah, especially understand key takeaways. Okay, do you think it's super safe to skim this for like 5 minutes and call it good?
No.
Uh,
Maybe.
Probably not, because I'm handing it to you and telling you that this is an extremely important paper. And what we're gonna hear about today is I have actually done a lot of the work for you in handing you this golden paper and telling you that it is worth reading. The rest of doing a big literature review is figuring out what is worth reading, okay? So if I'm handing you a paper, or your professor in another class is handing you a paper and saying, read this, it's probably important that you do actually read it, okay? So you might read it start to finish. Maybe you bounce around, maybe you start with the abstract, do the intro, like however you read it, you probably want to read it almost in entirety. Okay, so in this case, you know that this paper is worth reading. Okay, there are two other cases that I want to talk about, and these have come up because there are certain of you in this room who are doing literature for one reason, and certain of you in this room who are doing literature for a very different reason. And so I've had different pieces of advice for you depending on which one of these you're doing. So another reason you might do a literature review is that we have some brand new research idea. Taylor was having a hard time falling asleep one night. My brain was stuck in a loop, and I said, I wonder if anyone's ever done this. This seems really cool. And so you start thinking, we could do this, that, and the other thing. But it's really important for us to understand if that particular thing has already been done or not. And a lot of times it has, because there are a lot of really smart people in the world and a lot of people doing really great research. So one thing we might do is a very targeted literature review to see if that one idea, that one thing that we're thinking about doing, if that particular thing or that particular method has been done before. And this is extremely targeted, okay? So what are some implications for doing your literature review if this is why you're doing it? Charles?
Just because you're probably trying to aim at like a broader scope, you probably want to focus on like the beginning and end of the paper. So the reason they're doing research and then what they pulled away and seeing if their results or methods were the same as what you're focusing on.
Yes, so in this particular area, you are going to be, as actually, maybe we can compare and contrast. So this is extremely targeted. There will probably, unless it's a very well understood area that you happen to think was novel, there may only be one or two papers that do exactly that thing. And so you're mostly looking at papers to decide whether or not it's okay to throw them out. And most of them you will. And you won't read them because you'll see, that title's not what I'm doing. Nope, that title's not what I'm doing. That might be what I'm doing. You read the abstract, nah, they're doing something different. You throw it away. Okay, so this is extremely focused search. You will probably not read the majority of what you see. You will only read those papers that appear to be extremely similar to your new idea. Okay? Now, this is in contrast to this last reason, which is a little bit, albeit harder, but maybe a little bit more common of a reason that you're doing literature review, which is you want to understand in a broad sense. what all has been done and what is left to be done. And usually in research, that's like, we're trying to propose something, so we wanna understand like, what gaps are ripe for solutions. Like, there is enough background literature to support a solution for that particular problem, but it hasn't yet been done. And a lot of times we need to like cast our nets nice and wide for this. And so we end up reading a lot more titles. So we say, oh, that's roughly related to this area. Let's see what they did. That's roughly related to that area. Let's see what they did. Okay, so this is a little bit different from what we did before. So you will not read many papers in this prior section, but the ones that you do choose, you will likely read them very carefully. So you're either choosing very few and reading them very closely, or you're gonna read a lot and read them a lot less closely, okay? So if you're trying to understand in a broad sense, what is going on, maybe in tactile robot sensing, you're gonna say, oh, that sounds interesting, that sounds interesting, that sounds interesting. You're gonna grab maybe 15 papers, but you are not gonna read them line for line. Because if you're reading them line for line, it takes what, like a couple of hours to read a single paper? If you only have 20 hours in a week, which is, you know, maybe even more than probably what you have, you are only able to read very few papers, which means you are not going to get a good understanding of what is the research landscape in that area, right? You need to cast your nets wide and get a rough understanding of what's happening everywhere. Okay, so you will end up reading or skimming far more papers, but you will not read them word for word. Okay. Any questions so far? Yeah, Alex?
For the last one, review papers were like pulled.
Yes, yes, okay, so review papers can be good. Depends on the review paper. So we're actually gonna talk about that in just a second, the very next slide. So let's put a pin in that. Anything else before I move on to the next slide? So this is why my advice is vastly different depending on why the heck you're doing the lit review. Haley?
Can you share these slides with us?
I can, yeah. Yep. I'm also recording the Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'll share the slides too. Okay, this is an awful slide. Please never show me a slide like this, but I ran out of time. I apologize. There are different types of papers that we read. A lot of people come into science thinking, science paper. All science papers are science paper, right? But it's not all the same. And they come in different forms. So a standard research publication, when I say a standard research publication, I'm thinking of the type of publication in which you have an abstract, an intro, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, okay? But it turns out even in that form, there's kind of two different versions. One is a conference paper and one is a journal paper. Journal papers are usually longer. They're also a bit more prestigious. So journals, to get accepted by a journal, journals usually have a pretty high rejection rate. That means that of all the papers that get submitted to a journal, they only accept a certain percentage of those, and it's generally smaller than what a conference will accept. But that is not always the case. There are particular conferences, especially in robotics, where the conference is so big and so well known that their rejection rate or acceptance rate, however you look at it, if you're a glass half full, half empty kind of person, is the same, if not more competitive than some of the really prestigious journals in this area. Who knows exactly what conference I'm talking about? ICRA. The International Conference of Robotics and Automation is like the robotics conference in all of robotics. It's international. It goes every year from like North America, Asia, Europe, and around again. Okay. An ICRA paper is roughly worth the same as a journal paper. Okay. All right, so we have conference and journals. Those are the standard intro methods, results. But then there's also review or survey papers. The term review or survey is synonymous. And these are papers that do not do a particular experiment, but their goal is to synthesize the lit review on your behalf. Okay, so a review paper, actually, let's look at one. I have an example of each one of these. One of my favorite review papers, this was one of the papers I refer to a lot in my PhD. This talks about a review of intent detection, arbitration, and communication aspects of shared control for physical human-robot interaction. Let's look at the number of citations for this article. They cite 166 papers. So they understood what happened in 166 papers, and they synthesized that information, telling you a story about the state of the art in this area of research. And they got it down to, I don't know, it is actually a really long journal or a review paper, but it's less than 20 pages. Haley?
When you say like state of the art, that just mean like the most recent findings?
Yep. It just means like, what are the questions that have already been solved? And what are the questions left to be solved? And a good review paper will tell you both. A good review paper will take this 166 papers that they've read, and they'll say, within this one theme, we have done a really good job at X, Y, and Z. And they'll cite all the papers that do X, Y, and Z. And they'll say, but there's this crucial thing that we're still trying to do and nobody has solved it. Okay, so they're doing this job for you, of telling you what exists and what doesn't exist. And it can be really nice. They are extremely long, and some of them are not very well written. So one thing that can sometimes happen with a literature, you might even think of this as like a published literature review, is a review or a survey. One thing that can happen is people will read 166 papers and they will go, paper 1 did XYZ, paper 2 did XYZ, but they will not draw connections between what this person did versus what this person did, or whether that actually solved the problem or whether it created new problems. These are things that should fill in a good literature review, making connections, understanding themes, grouping by common issues. However you see the organization of these ideas in your mind, it might be a good way to organize it, but you should be grouping and making connections between sets of papers.
So
Gary?
it's kind of like, instead of summarizing, doing like a synthesis or analysis.
Yes, 100%. It is a synthesis, for sure. It is not a summary. Very good. Okay, so that's a review paper. Let's take a peek at a conference paper. This is a conference paper that Dylan Ma recently published at CASE. You'll notice that it is, I believe it's 6 pages, very short. Usually 2 column. We've got images, we've got intro, methods, results and discussion. He mushed them together, and then conclusions and future work. All right, so pretty short. Let's look at a journal paper. This is a paper that I helped to publish in my postdoc. It's a good bit longer-ish, depends on the journal. Every journal sets their own page lengths, but same format. We've got images, we've got experiments, we've got methods, we've got results, discussion, conclusion. Right. The other piece is what you might call like an opinion piece. And I have also done one of those. It's not as common, and it's more likely to be not published at a journal, but maybe published with a magazine. So, although that's kind of hard to say. So this was published in Science Robotics. Now, Science Robotics has a couple of different like types of articles that are different from the results, discussion, conclusion format. So they have a focus article that is extremely short. It's like, I think it's like 1,000 words is the max. And then they have a viewpoint, which is more like a review paper. And then they have some of your more standard methods, results, discussion, conclusion papers. Okay. So this one, you'll also notice that it's not a literature review. We only cite 10 papers. There's no experiments. it's really just a way of saying, hey, we experts in this community think that these are the main hurdles that researchers should be focusing on. And it's a way of just putting our opinion about the field out into the ether. And science said, yes, we agree with you, and they published it, okay? Very, very different format, but is another method of, technical writing. Okay, so that's types of papers. All right, so let's say you've decided which of the 3 reasons you're doing a literature review. And maybe you fall more so into this last category if you're trying to get a good idea of what's going on in the field. Let's talk about deciding what to read. So you go onto the FSU website, you type in your biggest keyword, maybe you're like, I want to do exoskeleton, so you type exoskeleton and it pulls up 100,000 results. How do you look at those 100,000 results and decide what to read? First off, you're gonna look at the title. That's the first thing you're gonna see, and ideally, it's descriptive enough to determine whether it actually relates to what you're interested in. So maybe you take those 80 interesting titles and you go ahead and download those PDFs to your computer. The next thing that you might read is the abstract. Short, sweet, it's supposed to be 1 paragraph that does actually summarize the paper as a whole. So usually an abstract is like 1 sentence intro, 1 sentence methods, 1 sentence results, 1 sentence conclusion. So it is a very nice, sweet way of determining what actually are they about to tell me in this paper. And so, excuse me, sometimes the title and the abstract do not align as well as you thought they did. And so you throw those papers out and you say, okay, they're not doing what I thought they were doing. And so maybe you have 40 papers left after you read the abstract. 40 of those papers, you read the abstract and you're still not entirely sure whether those contain the information that you're looking for. And so another really great way to decide whether or not to read in more detail is to then read the conclusions. So choosing these extremely short sections, when you look at the whole scope of the paper, these are the shortest sections of the paper, but they pack the most punch in terms of telling you what the paper is all about. All right, so I want you to think about, like, it is absolutely not a good idea to type exoskeletons in, get 100,000 results and click on the first one and read it in its entirety. You are setting yourself up for failure. You're never going to get through all of that literature. Okay. All right. So let's say you have 10 to 20 papers that still seem relevant after reading the title, abstract, and conclusions. Let's determine how much merit you should give to that paper, even though you're completely new to this field, all right? So there are a couple of things that can tell you whether you should consider this as a good paper or a bad paper. So one of them is a year of publication, and it's not necessarily that it's a good paper or a bad paper, but it's really about how much you should care about it or how much weight you should apply to that paper. So are we looking for a publication that's extra, extra old, or are we more excited to see papers that are brand new? Why do you say that?
Because an older one, there could be new findings that overwrite it per se, or make it obsolete, or more detailed papers that you can find later on.
Absolutely. So a lot of times, sometimes findings are refuted by later papers, or maybe there's a method that was really great in 2016, but we came up with an even better method in 2020, and that is now the state of the art. So if you're trying to understand the state of the art, then looking at papers that are even like 5 years or greater in age, you're probably out of what's most recent. Okay. And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't read those. There are some canonical papers that are really great background information that maybe a professor hands you and says, hey, this one has stayed important, read it. So that's things like when we're in human biomechanics and I give you papers from like the 80s, it's because those ideas are still percolating. And I'm telling you to read it because it's useful background information. Okay. However, I'll play devil's advocate with that answer, which is the newer the findings, the less peer review it's been through, right? So supposedly it's gone through some peer review before the journal decided to accept it, but there's some additional peer review that happens thereafter when other scientists from around the world read that paper and decide whether it has merit or not. Okay, so some of that happens in the years that follow, so just keep both in mind, yeah.
So I know if like a newspaper posts something that's like incorrect and they find out it was like,
Yeah.
or they post a retraction. Is that something that happens in the scientific community or does
It-
the paper just float?
It does in extreme cases, so if there were like ethical issues that happened, it will be retracted and removed from publication. Or if there was like a serious error, like we know for a fact that we had completely forgot a term in this equation, which causes all of our results to be incorrect, they might pull that. But if there's something that like there's some argument over whether it was truly an error or just like a difference of perspective, it'll usually stay. It's usually pretty rare to completely retract. It's also like, it doesn't look good to have a retracted paper.
I don't know if that's scientific or not. I've seen in like other disciplines where one author will post something and another author will post like, I think it's this, and then they'll kind of go back and forth a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's as common in like STEM where it's a little more cut and dry.
It's actually really interesting you say that because this review paper, I don't know much about, I guess, where it was published, but they have this mechanism by which an initial writer will write a review paper. And then they will ask a set of reviewers, not just to review whether it should be accepted, but to write a rebuttal on that review paper. And so the reason this came across my desk is because my advisors, Dr. Schmiedler and Dr. Winsing, wrote the rebuttal to this document that said like, we agree with these things, there's some other things that probably should have been in this review, that type of thing. And then I think the original author might even get like a final rebuttal. But it's a very interesting mechanism of publication that is a little bit rare these days. I don't see that very much, but that did actually happen on this one.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I added this and I want to caveat it. So I said that I'm assuming you're coming into this literature review with no experience in this area before, so you wouldn't know who the good authors are and who the bad authors are. But you might have a sense of the quality of the school. And in fact, you could maybe even go look up like the US News and World Report ranking for colleges of engineering in the United States and get a good sense of whether a school puts out high quality papers or not. So if you are looking at the author list and they're from some school you've never heard of, not a great sign. Yeah. If it's from Harvard, I would give that a little bit more credence than from, I'm not gonna say any names because that's rude. Okay, so you can look at the school as some indication of the quality of the authors. But as you read more and more and more, you will start to realize who are authors that publish a lot, who are authors that show really impressive results, who are authors that Dr. Higgins talks about a lot, who are authors that show up at the conferences that I go to. These are the authors that you probably want to pay close attention to. And this is also something your professor can help you with. If you're like, hey, do you know any of these authors? And they're like, oh yeah, they're really good. Then you're like, oh, okay, now I can give this paper more credence. Okay. The journal is actually a lot more helpful. The journal itself, the publication venue that published the paper, there are all sorts of metrics on journals that help you determine the quality of that journal. So one of them, for instance, is the acceptance rate. We've already talked about that. So every wave you get of publications that people are like, I'm going to submit a paper and I want you to consider it for publication. The percentage rate tells you how good of a journal that is. If they only select like the top 10 papers out of thousands of papers they get, you know you're only getting the cream of the crop. You're only getting those ones that are really impressive and or like groundbreaking work. But if they accept like 80% of the papers they get, you know there's going to be some slop in there. There were some reviewers who didn't want to read too carefully and they said, I'm sure it's fine, accept it. Right, so you're going to get some chaff in with your wheat. I do have some links here. I think I'm going to skip them for right now. These are links to where you can find the acceptance rates for ICRA and a journal like RAL. And you'll see that the ICRA and the RAL acceptance rates are very similar, even though ICRA is a conference, RAL is a journal, just to back up what I said on previous slides. The other one is how often is this publication cited? And so here, for example, this is through Google Scholar. You can see the H index of lots of different top journals. The H index has to do with how many times did another paper cite a paper from your journal versus the number of journals that you publish. So there's actually a mathematical formula for the H index. You can go look it up. And obviously the higher the H index, the better the journal. Okay, so if you have a paper, you're like, I don't know how to tell if this paper is any good or not. You pull up the H indices of the top. So this is particularly for robotics. You might want to put in a better keyword for like the area that you're actually in. So maybe it's like rehabilitation robotics. You see what are the top cited publications in rehabilitation robotics. If your journal's not on there, you know, look at it a little differently. Okay, now if it's an RAL paper, you're like, oh wow, this probably got vetted really well. Okay, so the number of citations, that's the H index. Here's a link to the definition of the H index. It says the H index can be calculated for journals as well as authors. So if you have a publication, you have an H index. I don't know what mine is, but I really probably should. And then impact factor. Impact factor is just another metric. It's not the same as the H index, but it is related. So again, number of citations over publications in the last 2 years, it's a metric, and you can find it for all of the journals for a particular area to determine what is the ranking of the quality of these journals, right? And you don't have to know anything about these areas of research to be able to determine which of these journals is better than another. Questions here? I have not even talked about reading the actual paper yet. At this point, I've been talking for, oh God, too long. And I've talked about reading the title, the abstract, and the conclusions. And that's the majority of what I'm going to tell you about today. The rest, telling whether the meat of the paper, there's a lot more nuance there. There are some things we can go on, but there's a lot more nuance. So one thing that I want to caution you on is the difference between readability versus merit of the contribution, okay? And we talk a lot about this in human biomechanics, but I almost put a different skew on it. In human biomechanics, you end up reading a lot of papers that are very dense and that are really hard to read and really hard to understand. And I try to make a very big deal over the fact that it's incredibly important for you to communicate clearly so that a more broad audience, like a room full of undergrads who have never read papers like this before, can get something useful out of it. So I almost equate readability with merit of the paper. And you're probably going to have a higher impact, but this is more important for you as a writer than it is for you as a reader. So what I don't want you to do is to pick up a paper and say, I actually understood this one. This makes me it's incredibly important. It's not always the case. I wish it were that way. I wish that the people who are really good at doing science were also the people who are really good at communicating clearly. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, those are like Venn diagrams of circles that don't touch. So I want you to keep in mind that these two things are different. Okay. So sometimes being able to read it is a good sign of a good publication, but sometimes there is still really good merit, even in those papers that we have to stress our brain to really comprehend what's going on. Okay. The other thing, and this is, I'm not going to cover too much on it because this really comes with practice, is understanding the quality of the evidence of the paper. So let's say your paper makes a claim like, I think this is, and I'm going to pick a little bit, Ahmed, on one of the papers you read, just because I think it's a fantastic example of this. This paper is going to claim that I think I have the mathematical model that explains human motor learning. And so what is a model usually used for?
Simulations.
simulation, which is predicting behavior, so predicting future behavior. So you say, okay, I have this set of equations that I think describes actual behavior. If you were to believe me that I have come up with this beautiful model that predicts behavior, what do you need from me to believe me?
That's all.
What does this evidence look like? You need to see actual behavior versus what my model said would happen, right? Prediction versus actual, so that you can see whether there's a huge amount of error between the two or not, right? This process of looking at the claim that they're making and deciding for yourself, what evidence do I need to see for me to actually believe you? Is the meat of determining the quality of their evidence. Now, if you have a paper that says, I think I have this fantastic model, I think it's gonna work great, da, 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 and it never shows you how it compares to true behavior, I don't believe you. There's not enough evidence there for me to believe you. So if you're writing a paper like that, that's something you should put. But if you're reading a paper like that, it's something that you shouldn't believe unless the evidence is there.
It's kind of like how last year there were a few papers that we read that would just end with like, well, we don't really know if this works. Right, like in the last 3 sentences of the conclusion, they just kind of like
And on a really vague note,
end on a really vague note and be like,
this is a really good point.
yeah.
So this is a really good point. So let me, cause I've run into this with a couple of other people too. If a paper ends and says, here are the weaknesses of what we just suggested. And they pick it apart themselves and they tell you what are the issues with what they just did. Does that make you believe them more or less that what they did do has merit? More. It's weird, right? Like, I'm telling you that there are issues with what I've just presented to you. And because I'm telling you that, you believe the other parts more. And I totally agree with that. So actually explicitly telling your audience what are the weaknesses lends credence to what the benefits of your methods are. And so if a paper is able to say like, we don't know if it works, that's less good.
Right.
What would be better is if they said, this particular parameter we're not sure about because we didn't explore behavior X, Y, or Z. That's super like awesome. And then it says like, okay, well, if we're going to investigate this model further, someone else probably needs to do an experiment on behavior X, Y, and Z. So it sets up the next researcher to do the thing that needs to happen next, right? Any other questions or comments? There are some like small things while you're reading that you can look at. So like if they have, what is it? There's some sort of phrase that's like, if you have attention to detail in the small things, it probably shows that you paid attention to detail in the big things, right? So if you come across a paper and there's just like grammatical errors throughout, or we'll say grammatical, punctuation, whatever it is, that also makes me doubt your results more, right? So if you didn't check your punctuation, you probably also didn't check your math. And one of those is a lot more concerning than the other, okay? All right, so there's little things that you will learn over time. So let's talk about what do you do when you have decided that this is a great paper, I should read it nearly in its entirety. One thing is that you want to be taking good notes, and I know this is super vague as to what I mean by taking good notes, so I'm going to show you some examples of the way that I have done things in the past and the way that Pravin has done some things in the past. And I think they both have some merit, although I think Pravin is probably a bit more attention to detail and more organized than myself. So one is to actually, I love to print out the paper, but there are plenty of digital ways now to highlight, annotate, add comments to papers online. You should be doing that. That's close reading. If you have decided that you're going to read a paper in its entirety, take the time to write down your thoughts as they come across.
Does it make more sense to, I guess, highlight, annotate, and pick out key things on your second read through, or?
That's a good point. I think it's a personal preference, yeah. So when I read through, I find it, Especially if I'm very new to an area of research, what I will do is on my first read through, I will try not to get too hung up on anything. And I will try to get the broadest gist that I can, but at the same time, I'm gonna highlight anything that I don't understand or any term that's new to me or seems important. After that first read through, where I've understood maybe 10% of it, I at least know what words I should go learn about. And I go, if I'm super attention to detail, I will go through every single thing I highlighted and I will try to understand the gist of that term. You're not gonna be able to go take a course on every term that you read, so don't go too far down the rabbit hole, that's dangerous. But understanding the gist of each of those terms that you highlighted and then read it again. So you read it so that you can figure out, what do I need to understand better before I'm going to actually grasp this paper? Go do the background research, come back, read it again, and you'll be amazed at what you take away the second time. So that's my own preference, but you might be different. Key note of hypotheses and takeaways, and so that is what I've done here. This is actually the notebook there where I kept all of my papers for my prelim exam. So for my prelim exam, I was told to do a literature review on extremely slow walking, because we had reason to believe from some preliminary results in the lab that the mechanics of extremely slow walking were just like wildly different than regular speed walking, and on intent recognition for exoskeletons. So I had 2 topics. I needed to write an 8-page literature review on those 2 topics. And I ended up citing, I think, 52-ish papers. Now I read, or I at least looked at, far more than 52 papers, okay? So what I'm showing you in this notebook are ones that I thought were good enough to read past the abstracted conclusion, okay? And I printed them out because that's the way my brain works. I don't know why it is, but my attention span is longer on hard paper than it is on a computer. And what you might see if you flip through, some of them don't have many annotations. I did develop some sort of color coding system for different themes, and I legitimately was putting these things in stacks. I put them in stacks based on whatever theme I was trying to explore at the time. And you'll notice at the very top of the paper, I put like the key takeaway. Like if you were to tell me what is the one thing you want me to take away from this paper, I'd write it at the top, like the key finding. And so what you can do is when you go through these papers, you can look at the key finding for every paper. And you can start to see the connections between these papers a lot more easily. Okay, so I take really, really tight note of the key hypothesis and or takeaway. We've already talked about like highlighting the important information or words or phrases that are unfamiliar to you. And then, like I said, this is one way you can stay organized, is like actually printing them out, putting them in piles, playing around with them, moving those piles around, like resorting while you're writing your literature review. Or you can use a more digital solution. So there's a program that is open source, it's free, you can download it, it's called Mendeley. It is the one that I use. It's called a reference manager. So I told you how to get to PDFs. Once you download your PDFs, you can import PDFs into Mendeley Reference Manager, which lets you do some of the very, very similar things. In terms of like, you can annotate, you can pull up the paper itself, you can add comments, you can highlight, you can annotate, and you can also sort these things into groups and collections. Okay, so if you're playing around with theme like, I don't know, ground reaction forces during slow walking, I can put all of the papers that have anything to say about ground reaction forces into one group, and another one about knee flexion angles in another group. And then I can rearrange however many times I want. Okay, so very similar thing, just the digital version. The other thing that's great about Mendeley Reference Manager is that you can export a .bib file, which is the way that you create a LaTeX bibliography. So let's say you have all of the papers you want to cite. It's almost never like that. You start writing and then you add 18 more papers. You have to do this all over again. But let's pretend you have all the papers you're going to cite. You export your entire library to a .bib file. You upload that .bib file to Overleaf. And then magically, while you are writing your paper, you can do /cite and then a keyword, and it will cite the paper that has that keyword. And it's beautiful. And even if you rearrange your citations, it puts all the numbers in the correct order for you in the bibliography automatically. It updates as soon as you hit recompile. Okay. So that's how I get my .bib files. The last thing I want you to see is Provin's example. So I'm gonna pass these around, flip through the way that Provin takes notes. The reason I'm saying this is because the way that he did this in particular, I don't know if it helped you to stay organized necessarily because there are so many highlights, but I want you to take this as an example of an extremely close reading that made it easier for Provin and I to discuss this in our individual meetings. So whenever there was a key paper that Provin was particularly interested about, he would come in with the paper looking like this. And we would go through the exact line and I could answer questions about like, when they said this, I didn't understand that. And I could look at the paper, read what they said before, read what they said after and say, okay, now I understand the context of what they were saying on that line. Let me try to answer for you. And so we could do that for any or all of the highlights, underlines, or whatever, okay? So I found this method, like actually printing it off, bringing it into my office, particularly easy to facilitate our discussion, mostly because I haven't read every paper out there. So if you bring in a paper or you mention a paper, I probably don't know what you're talking about. But if I can see the paper in hand, I can look at the context. I can flip through and see what their conclusions were, try to understand better and like read the actual phrasing XYZ. Okay. Any questions? Didn't you also have a color coding scheme? You said it's not super consistent, but
I tried to,
Yeah.
used blue for things that I wanted to go back to.
Mhm.
Red for things that I didn't know, that I needed to read, and black for things that I needed to ask. That was my consistent thing.
cool. If a color coding scheme works for you, do it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. I think the last thing I'll say is discussing a little bit of, I can give you an example of what my prelim exam looked like. I told you I read an 8-page paper with like citing those papers. I can show you what that looks like. I can upload it if you want to refer to it, but let's talk a little bit about using AI for literature review. So one, I think that AI can be a huge help in terms of efficiently finding papers that are related to a particular idea. And I myself have used ChatGPT when I'm writing. What ends up happening is I'll start writing a paragraph and I'll say, I need to make this claim, but I don't know what paper is going to back up this claim, but I know that I need a citation if I'm going to say this. So I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll say, ChatGPT, I want to say this, but can you find me the citation that will back up that statement? I want you to give like a huge caveat here though, because ChatGPT can and does hallucinate. So do not copy and paste that citation and use the citation. Take the title of that citation, put it into the FSU library system, find the PDF, download the PDF, read it to make sure it actually says what ChatGPT says it says, and then sign it. Okay. Yes. Yeah, any AI you use, you need to go back and make sure that citation actually exists. And not just exists, but actually comes to the conclusion that you are thinking it comes to. So go back and read the conclusions of that paper and make sure it corroborates what you're trying to say. Okay, that is the responsible way to use chat for something like this. Robin, I've asked you this like 18,000 times, but you have other AI agents that do certain things for you. What are the other ones?
Notebook LN.
Thanks, Robin.
That's the one he recommended.
I'm sorry, I'm just giving you a hard time. Okay, Notebook LN, what does Notebook LN do?
I think it's not LLM or something.
Oh, LLM, okay.
Yeah.
So it generates audio, or if I upload a paper, it generates audio and I'm using the audio.
Oh, okay,
There is one website that I recently found, this is a free website, but we get, I think 3 or 4 literature review.
okay.
It's called Undermined,
Undermined,
right?
okay,
Undermined, it's a research assistant. So what you do is you go there and type what you want to do literature review on.
Yeah.
It asks certain questions back to you. And then you keep on answering its question and it generates a prompt. So
Uh-huh.
unless you are satisfied with the prompt, it keeps on asking the question. After you're satisfied, you hit search and it generates a 30-page literature review paper with everything that's published in that domain with links that you can actually click and it opens the paper. Sometimes PDF, sometimes governance website.
Okay,
And last time I used it, they were providing 1 or 2 trials per month.
am I gonna be happy if you do this and you copy and paste what Undermine gives you?
But
No.
it does great, it feels like cheating, but it gives tables and comparisons and what are the top papers, what are the top papers citing, what papers cite the top papers.
So what is the responsible way to make sure that the actual research says what this LLM is saying it says? Reading the paper. Go find the paper. If you can click it and get the PDF, that's great. But you need to at least skim that paper to make sure you understand that it says what you think it says. Okay? You are responsible for for fact checking any AI that you use. Okay? Okay, based on that prompt. Okay, what else? There was something else. What's the one that gives you the network of what cites what? I always forget that one.
Connected papers. Research Rabbit, connected papers,
Research Rabbit.
that's one. And then English connected papers.
Okay, shows you how a web of papers are interconnected. Usually by citing one another. Okay, cool. All right, great. I just wanted this to be a resource for where you might find AI assistance for doing what you're doing with the huge caveat that you are responsible for your information. Okay. Another way you could continue to find papers, you find one that either I handed to you or you've determined that is really fantastic, go look at the papers that they cited. Read those next. That's like easy link to what some other person who's really good at writing thought were excellent papers. So you can give those a little bit more credence too. Okay. All right. Was this any help to anybody? A little bit?
Definitely.
Okay, okay, great, awesome. So, like I said, I recorded this. I'm gonna put this on YouTube. Yeah, I'm gonna share it around. Any other questions, comments, or concerns before we wrap up? Nope. Okay. All right, that's all I want to say.